Near the center of every great story is a great conflict, a great war. Two soldiers, each with a gift for storytelling, survive the storm and steel of the greatest war the world had ever seen. J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. Together, they used their imagination to battle the darkest forces of their age. A hobbit, a wardrobe, and a great war.
So, dear Joseph, let me introduce you for all the people that will see this interview. As I told you, is a lot of people are like 10,000 people that follow Mr. Bombadil, and
Wow.
is from all the Latin American people. For example, I met Mr. Bombadil, Juan Tomas, because a lot of my friends saw the fan page in Instagram, and now they are 10,000 people that follow this Instagram page. And we want to interview you because we know your books. We know that you are a very clever person, that you can talk to us about C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. So let me introduce you for all the people, for all these people that will see uh, this video, this interview. So, Mr. Joseph Loconte is senior fellow in Christianity and Culture at the King College and the director of the Simon Center for American Studies and at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. From 2009 to 2020, he served as an associate professor of history at King's, where he taught courses on Western civilization, United States foreign policy, and international human rights. He also served as a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. In 2008, Mr. Loconte was named a distinguished visiting professor at the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. From 1999 to 2006, Mr. Loconte held the first chair in religion and civil society as the William E. Simon Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Loconte is the author of several books, including the New York Times bestseller, A Hobbit, a Wardrobe, and A Great War, How J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis rediscovered faith, friendship, and heroism in the cataclism of 1914 to 1918. And we were talking about this book, and also the work that he is doing with the documentary film based on this same book. He is native from Brooklyn, New York. Mr. Loconte has a master's degree from Wheaton College and earned his PhD in history at King's College London, in the University of London. So we are very proud. We are very excited to interview you, Mr. Loconte. So, well, I don't know if you want to say some words from all the people that will see this
Yes.
first video, and
Yes.
we then continue with the interview.
Well, yes. Thank you, Manuel and Juan. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you about this amazing story about the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. It is really such an encouraging story of friendship and creativity in the context of some very difficult times of wartime. So it's a great privilege and pleasure to be with you and with your audience. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you to you, Mr. Loconte. And you said something that we are interested to ask you because, well, you are a historian and you know the themes of the World War and all the things that are in the context of the history and the thoughts of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. And the first question that I want to ask you is how the works of Tolkien and Lewis represent the situation in which they lived and in which they were written. Do you think that they wrote these works in this idea of the change of an era?
That is an excellent question. It's a very big question. In so many ways, authors, they never really escape the times in which they live. They are products of the times in which they live. And I think if you think about what happened in between World War I and World War II and where they were in England. So what are they witnessing after the First World War? As you guys know, Europe was devastated by that war. And it was not so much true in the United States. As you might remember, the Americans, as my British friends like to say, we came to the First World War late. We showed up late. and we suffered the least as Americans, and we came out the strongest. But it was very different in Europe, especially for France, especially for Great Britain, other countries like Italy, and of course, Russia. So the impact of the First World War on Europe was really devastating, not just in a physical sense, but I think in an emotional and even spiritual sense, because so many men died and it seemed to be for almost nothing. They couldn't understand what it was about. So that began, for many people, they began to question, well, what is this democracy, this capitalism, this religion, this Christianity, which seemed to get us into the war? All of these quote unquote democratic states or Christian states, they were the ones who launched this war and created all of this human suffering and misery. So for many people, they became disillusioned. They began to think something is wrong with this system of democratic capitalism and Christianity. And so if you think about it, Manuel, ideologies, the ideas of communism, which were already there, they take off. They really take off in the years after the First World War as a substitute for democratic capitalism, and also, of course, fascism. Benito Mussolini comes into power, as you know,
Yes.
In 1922. And I should say that my grandfather, Giuseppe Aiello, he left his island of Ventotene out off of Naples. He left in 1921 at 16 years old. Think about that, Manuel. A 16-year-old boy leaves his family and never sees his mother and father again. He comes to the United States. Why do young men do that? I think because they felt there was no future for them in Italy. And Italy was on the winning side of the war. They were on the winning side, but they were devastated. So the point is, Tolkien and Lewis are watching this from Great Britain, and they're watching the rise of these ideologies, communism, fascism, eugenics. And I think this is really troubling them. And I think as you look at their works carefully, The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia, Lewis's space trilogy, I think they are very deliberately pushing back. They're pushing back against these ideologies, which are anti-God, right? Anti-virtue, against the individual. The individual doesn't matter to these ideologies. The individual serves the state, right? And so think about, I'll just say this, Manuel, then I'll be quiet for a moment. I want to hear from you. If you think about their stories, they place such an emphasis on the individual, the power of the smallest individual, the smallest hobbit, the little hobbit, or the little mouse, Reepicheep, in the Chronicles of Narnia. Their choices really matter. That's an amazing thing to be doing in the 1930s and 40s, because that's not how many people are thinking about the power of the individual.
Yeah, that's right. You say something very and quite interesting, because I think that, well, in your book, in the first chapter, when you are talking about the history and all this myth of progress,
Yes.
I think that, well, we can track this ideology when the modernism began with Descartes, with Pascal, Locke, Hobbes, and so on. But I think that Karl Marx has a very important part in this myth of progress. I think that Marx says that we need to transform the reality.
Yes.
And the human person also needs to transform. So the idea of this World War I and the Second World War
Yes.
is this idea of transformation of
Yes.
the human being, and also the difference between Italy and the United Kingdom. You say, well, in Italy they were in the winning part, but they didn't know it. But also in your chapter says, well, Lewis and Tolkien says that is this idea of patriotism and heroism because it's the ethos
Yes.
that they lived in England.
Yes.
So I question me, and also I think this a question that has Juan Tomas, because nowadays we can see that the myth of the progress is also with the same power when we're Tolkien and Lewis, more with this technology also that we saw today that we depend on Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram that fell. So we live in this ethos, but
Yes.
we didn't know how to live with the heroism and patriotism. And in the case of Latin America, we are seeing the new ideals of the nationalism with Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president of Venezuela, the
Yes.
dictator of Cuba,
Yes.
with Donald Trump, and so on. So
Yes.
how we can say that is important, these books, these ideas, these elements that Tolkien and Lewis live, and they put in their books and say, hey, young people, hey, all the people, read it, because if you don't know what we are living, you will live again these ideas.
Yes. Yes. You put it very, very well, Manuel, and you have different themes embedded in what you said. Let's take the communism issue for a moment that you raised. I think you got it exactly right. The idea of progress within communism, but think about what they base the whole philosophy on. It's very materialist, right? It is atheistic by definition, and that's important because what the communists believe is that human nature is just fine, and the problem is the systems, the economic systems. The problem is private property. That's what the communists say. And if we just get rid of private property, that will eliminate conflict. That will eliminate selfishness and striving, right? That's the idea of Marxism. And from the perspective of faith, a Jewish faith, a Christian faith, we'd have to say, well, that really doesn't make any sense, because human nature is not just some lovely thing where people want to do the good all the time and they're ready to cooperate, and all we need to do is get rid of private property. That's not the source of the problem. The source of the problem is in the human heart.
Yes.
And that's what Tolkien and Lewis profoundly believe. The source of the problem is in the human heart. All of us are capable, yes, of virtue and acts of heroism, but let's not forget the other darker side, Manuel. We're also capable of becoming, Sauron. We're all capable of going into Mordor and never coming out, right? Capiche? And that's what the Marxists don't seem to understand. They don't understand the dark side, the dark bent in our natures. As Lewis and Tolkien would say, the doctrine of the fall. That's very vivid to Tolkien. If you read some of his personal letters as a believing Catholic, and Lewis as a believing Protestant, the doctrine of the fall, it looms large. None of their heroes in their story, if you think about it, are immune to temptation. Any of them could fall to temptation, from Gandalf right down to any of the Pevensie children in the Chronicles of Narnia. All of them can be tempted and drawn into the darkness. That's a sober view of human nature that I don't think the communists have or the fascists have either. What do you think?
I don't know. This is a very difficult
big question.
Yeah, also. I think also, as you note, that the idea of the grace, the idea of the theology that Tolkien and Lewis know, is a very important thing. And also we think, and we also want to know the idea of the faith in both. You mentioned that also Louis was Catholic and Louis were Protestant. But these ideals of the faith, the idea of to know a personal God that is also different of all the religions,
Yes.
because in Christianity we say, I can call God and God can call me.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this idea also is more or less in the vision in the Lord of the Rings,
Yes.
also in Narnia and the trilogy that you mentioned, and the letters and the conference that they gave. So I think that
Yes.
faith is an important element
Yes.
to be in a different way of the capitalism and socialism, communism, fascism.
Yes.
I think that the religion is the answer that they gave to all the people to say, we don't want a monetary system that is also the capitalism, the individualism, or
Yes.
the collectivism, the
Yes.
socialism, the materialism, the all the isms,
All the
except
isms. Yes. All of the isms. You're absolutely right. And to maybe add to that a bit, if you think about how Tolkien and Lewis both approach the question of values, morality, and faith, Tolkien is more quiet about that, isn't he?
Yes.
In The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, what is clear, even though there are no prayers, there's no reference to God in The Lord of the Rings, there is a clear moral code, and there's an absolute good, and there's an evil, right? There's a wonderful line in The Lord of the Rings. I'll try to quote it from memory. It's when Sam and Frodo, they're in the Dead Marshes. They're approaching Mount Doom, and they're almost in despair. And then Sam looks up and he sees a bright star twinkling, and he talks about that there's above all of this darkness there's light and high beauty beyond the darkness, light and high beauty. And that is Tolkien's way, I think, of talking about something transcendent, a transcendent good. He's just very quiet about how he expresses it, right? And Lewis is more explicit.
Yes.
C.S. Lewis is more explicit.
The lion, the resurrection.
Exactly. Aslan, the resurrection, he's very, very explicit about it. And I think part of that is because Lewis himself was an atheist, you know, well into his adult life, and his conversion to Christianity, which Tolkien had a real hand in helping, that was just so vivid for him that I think he wanted to be more open about that in ways through his literature that Tolkien took a different route, but they shared a common Christian faith, which is important to emphasize, right?
That's right. I heard a conference that you gave in 2018, and you said something that I uh, I think is very important in the whole ideas and the whole books of Tolkien and Lewis. And you said that Tolkien and Lewis says that friendship or friends in concrete are the solution for the bad things and the solution of the worst things that are happening in the world. So how we can say also that Tolkien helped Lewis and Lewis helped Tolkien. Well,
Yes.
it is the history that they helped together for
Yes.
write Narnia and write
Yes.
the Lord of the Rings or the next books.
Yes.
No?
Yes.
But I think it's more important because in Christianity, as we said, is the personal
Yes.
attention, is God talk to me, and also we want to be a communion.
Yes.
We don't have this communion, we don't can solve the problems that are
Right.
in the world.
That's right. That's exactly right, Manuel. You put it beautifully. If I had to describe what the book and then the film series that we're working on, the documentary film series, what it's about, I could put it down to three words. Three words.
Okay.
It's about war, it's about friendship, and it's about imagination. Because it was the difficulty, the crucible of war, the First World War, the Second World War. War made possible their amazing friendship, the friendship between Tolkien and Lewis. In some ways, the wars brought them together. But then it was their friendship that made possible the creation of their great imaginative works. So it's war, friendship, and imagination. But let's take some time with the friendship theme, because it is so important. And I think this is a problem maybe more for Americans than for Mexicans or those from Argentina, because we're so individualistic in America. This is a problem.
I agree with you.
This is a problem for America. You know, John Wayne doing things on his own, right? Well, I think that's not reality. It's not really reality. It's a tremendously important lesson from Tolkien and Lewis and the circle of friends that they created, fellow Christians and writers who met in community every week. Think about this, Manuel and Juan. These guys met every week. Either they met in a pub, in the Eagle and Child pub on Tuesdays, and then they met either Thursday or Friday. They met in Lewis's rooms, his academic rooms, every evening, every Friday, every week, and they met to discuss their works, their literature, and to challenge each other. So, for example, Tolkien read out loud. He read out loud virtually every chapter of The Lord of the Rings to C.S. Lewis and to the larger group of friends, the Inklings, they call themselves, those who dabble in ink, the Inklings. Think about that, reading out loud, sharing with your friend this work that you're putting your heart into, and Lewis would respond with constructive criticism. He would be cheering Tolkien on to keep on with the book, to keep writing it. Because remember, Tolkien starts this book, The Lord of the Rings, in 1937-38. He's going to work on it for the next 12 years. And he said very explicitly, Manuel, that if it had not been for C.S. Lewis's constant encouragement and demand for more, give me more, Tolkien, give me more, he never would have finished The Lord of the Rings. He never would have finished. And for the impact of Tolkien on Lewis, I think was also profound, not only because I think he helped lead him to Christian faith, and we can talk more about that, but Tolkien also, when Lewis wrote his first of the science fiction books, Out of the Silent Planet, Tolkien helped Lewis to find a publisher for that book. And that really set him on the way as a writer of fantasy. And that was Tolkien's encouragement to Lewis. He loved the book that he'd written, Out of the Silent Planet. He commended the book to a publisher, Tolkien did, and that helped Lewis to find a publisher. And then he's on his way as a writer. So they are writers in community. That's a huge point.
Yes, I think it's very important. And also, I remember the first club that Tolkien and his old friends founded, the Tea Club and the Barovian Society.
Yes.
And also, I think that is the preamble, the prologue of the Inklings.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't read all the letters of Tolkien, but I think that in the movie that was from Tolkien, when they met and when they found the Tea Club and the Barovian Society, the words that they say are, this is a private group, but with this group, we are going to transform the world with the beauty.
Yes.
Because with the beauty is the ideal that we are going to eliminate also the worst things that are in the world. And I think that also in the case of philosophy, the via pulchritudinis, the way of the beauty is the way that we are need nowadays, because we are not seeing the beauty in the other person, in the society, in the community, in the university, in the politics, and so on. So I think the prologue of this Tea Club and Barovian Society with this idea of the beauty is profound.
Yes.
And then Lewis and Tolkien made it with the friendship, with their that when they were friends.
Yes. Manuel, I'm so glad you made that point, because it's such an important point you made, and you stated it beautifully. These two men and then the larger circle, they're not just going to curse the darkness, right? They see the darkness, but they want to do something other than cursing the darkness. They want to offer, as you suggest, they want to offer a beautiful view of what human life can be, what it can look like, the kind of lives we were intended to live by God, and to play that out on the pages of their stories. So we see the darkness in their stories, but we also see heroism and sacrifice for a noble cause and friendship and love. And it doesn't matter where you are in your own journey in life, we all respond the same way, don't we? It touches our hearts because it's beautiful. It's moral beauty, right? And so they're using their gifts. This is the incredible lesson. One of the incredible lessons for me, they're not politicians. They're not policy people. They're writers, they're scholars, and they're going to use the gifts that they can to offer some light and beauty at a very dark time. And look at the impact they've had on millions of people for good. Wow, what a story.